Alright, I'm a day late on the review embargo, but here's my take on Dungeons & Dragons Dark Alliance, and it's not good. Here's the thing, I don't actually have footage for a lot of what I will talk about right now because Windows force updated in the middle of my biggest recording session and somehow my file got corrupted. I can't actually show on screen some of the examples of what I'm talking about, and there's no way in hell I'm going to go back and redo all of that, absolutely not, just to get it. So in the background is a mission being played solo with the Archer class, which I believe is fairly indicative of the overall experience. Dark Alliance is effectively just a mission hub and then a series of linear dungeons. You select your difficulty level and you go stand on a portal and you start playing. It's really simple and very quick to jump into, but there's a few things wrong right away. Number one, there are only 4 playable characters, and if you want to play in a group of 4, which is basically how the game was obviously designed to be played for all but one of the characters, there cannot be any repeats. This means if you main one particular class and someone else wants to play that class, one of you has to switch, period, and that type of restricted matchmaking and team composition mechanic is pretty terrible. There is a dwarf, defensive, kind of like a tank, a rogue, based on speed, it's a damage type, a barbarian guy with a big hammer, another damage type, and an archer, which is ranged and also an uber damage type. I mostly played the rogue, the barbarian, and the archer, but quickly realized that because I had to almost exclusively play solo during my review time, there was only one real viable option. The archer, as you'll see on screen right now, spec'd into critical hit multiplier and critical hit chance, can just walk through the level one-shotting everything. And the other classes I played were pretty much awful if I was alone. Tricks of the trade after doing this for so many years, if there's ever gear or loot with stat rolls, anything critical hit related is usually completely overpowered, at least at launch. Dark Alliance doesn't really break that pattern at all, and yes, specking crit with the Archer was stupidly strong to a point where in that narrow slice of gameplay, spamming heavy charged attacks and getting 5,000 damage crits 3 at a time to carve through act bosses like butter, I did have fun. The problem was, when I deviated from that in the slightest, the game almost immediately fell apart. Any other class, not really fun. Enemies became incredibly spongy right away, the pacing became shit, and I stopped wanting to play entirely. If I grouped up and didn't play the Archer, it was fine, I guess, but overshadowed by the knowledge that if I wasn't in a full group of 4 and getting bounced around between characters because you can't have repeats and someone always is going to be stubborn about that, it was going to lose its appeal once again, and even in a group of 4, there are so many other problems I just haven't even touched on yet, I can already say with certainty that you should not pay $40 for this game. So what's the largest issue? There's so many I will honestly have to leave some out, and again, I don't have direct footage of all this because my recording was corrupted, but SkillUp actually does have footage for most of it and did an excellent review himself, so you can check that out and I'll link it down below if you want to see actual visual examples. The largest issue to me is the AI. It's either completely broken or actually unfinished, and either way, it doesn't really function. Enemies don't even react to you half the time. Bosses and other large enemies can be stun-locked infinitely. Most of them just stand there and don't respond to your presence in the slightest. You can attack them from across gaps or higher elevation infinitely with no movement at all. And even when you're in their intended zone where they should be active and attacking you, they will sometimes just lose track of you and walk slowly back to their starting location or just teleport there even with no warning or reason. The AI might actually be the worst I've ever seen in a game this price in my entire life. Sometimes they stop and stand right in front of you to make a crude gesture or just stand there. Some of them have ridiculous health scaling, others don't. Sometimes their animations just don't show up. If they walk off a ledge or get pushed off a ledge, they just teleport somewhere else on the battlefield, sometimes a short distance, sometimes a longer distance, and the list goes on and on and on. Enemies are placed like clockwork in little open areas all throughout the level, and the level composition itself literally never changes. You have a linear pathway with open areas and enemies to kill that you don't need to kill at all, and you can run through practically every single level in the entire game with no issues at all, and just get to the final boss, get an automatic checkpoint, and then spam attempts until you win. And then the second worst part is you have these puzzles. The puzzles in this game aren't really puzzles, but what else do I even call them? It will be, for example, a frozen patch of ground that will kill you if you touch it or just inflict damage over time, right in front of a chest, like blocking off a chest, and to get to it, you need to stand near a fire and get the warmth buff. Now, if the chest had something good in it, if you had to like work hard or think hard to find the fire or get to the fire, that might work, but you don't. Every single time, the fire is right in front of the frozen ground. You just run next to it, cross the ground, get the chest, which contains gold and a potion or two almost every single time, maybe one piece of gear, that's like the good chests, and run back out. Zero thought, zero effort, Zero difficulty, just filler mechanics directly next to one another to bar the loot behind a non-existent barrier. It's incredibly shallow. That formula never ever changes. It would be a purple dark energy trap or a flame barrier, but the way to disable it is always right next to the thing itself. Like a lever 5 feet away to get a chest to come down from the ceiling, or whatever it is. And you literally never have to work hard, think hard, or try hard to get the rewards. Not ever, not once. Let's talk about the rewards. This is where I had fun, because when I got the goblin gear and certain other crit rolls on separate pieces, I could finally carve through the solo game with ease, but that's unique to one character it seems, and most other rolls that you get don't really make sense. The gear sets have bonuses that seem almost pointless for the most part, and even when you stack an attribute like stamina or ultimate charge, which might seem good in theory, it ends up being worthless because if you don't stack the crit damage or have someone with you who did, everything is so spongy it just stops being fun, especially solo. Here's another problem. The stamina mechanic is either oppressive and annoying or pointless. There's never middle ground. On the archer, I could infinite spam my heavy attack and just wait a second or two for it to recharge, but while I was doing that, my maximum stamina was being depleted. At first, that seems bad, and you might think that I'm about to rant against that system, but I'm not. Then I realized it can't go below a minimum threshold, so it might be annoying at that minimum threshold, but I could still walk through the level infinitely spamming heavy charged bow attacks. The way to resolve this, and regenerate health as well, plus potions, is to rest. Resting will fully replenish your stats and your consumables, but in trade, you sacrifice a chance at better loot. In theory, that seems fine, and I actually liked it when I first started playing, but once I discovered the lack of middle ground, either I beat everything too easily or it was a pain in the ass, I realized that the resting mechanic was a quality concept that just didn't quite land. I enjoyed the basic idea of risk versus reward, but when combat was so unpredictable, and not unpredictable in a chaotic fun type of way, unpredictable like sometimes your hits just won't register, sometimes enemies will glitch out and have no attack animation, therefore one-shotting you, etc., etc. When combat was so unpredictable, the idea of foregoing a survival boost if you aren't walking through one-shotting absolutely everything easily, and risking a long walk back to where you were, even though you can just run by everything because the AI is so slow and so unintelligent it will never hurt or punish you for that, and the mission structure is so rudimentary you probably don't even have to kill anything if you don't want to, outside of 1 or 2 packs at most, well, the idea of risk versus reward becomes tedium versus annoyance. Everything you do feels like it has a tiny amount, or actually a noticeable amount, of input lag, or like you are weighed down by some invisible force. Attack chains sometimes have big sweeping animations, and they're fun to look at the first time around, but by the end you were just getting killed because you took so long to finish the combo. The enemy who started winding up their attack chain after you started is about to finish. If you aren't killing everything in 1 or 2 hits, they will stack up and maybe pin you against a wall or just swarm you when they finally register that you exist, because it takes them a long time to do that. The AI clearly isn't capable of dealing with attacks at range, but it's more than happy to stomp you out if you try to fight too close, and it really is a weird juxtaposition of those two things. Status effects, for whatever reason, are absolutely insane. I don't have footage of this, but during a particular main act boss fight, I froze the enemy, and he sat there for the rest of the battle immobilized. When you get frozen or trapped or whatever, sometimes it just doesn't work to break free, but even if it does, you're almost certainly going to get hit while you're trapped, and at higher difficulties, one attack can very often, almost always, mean life or death for certain classes. Again, if you don't kill everything almost instantly, you are going to have a really bad time. Or maybe not, because the AI glitches so often, you can't really tell when a fight will be active or passive, because the boss just stopped moving, or got stun locked, or decided to stand right in front of you and do nothing for large spans of time. I don't even know at this point whether it's programmed or glitching. I actually can't tell if the game is glitching out and breaking, or if it was just programmed that way. For cutscenes and story, it's not actually that bad. The cutscenes are fairly engaging, nothing special, but not too bad, and the story is based on a universe with more lore than I can possibly fathom, so for anyone who cares deeply about the Dungeons & Dragons world, I'm willing to bet there are tie-ins and references all over the place. I'm not an expert on D&D, so I'm not the best person to review that aspect, but yeah, I'm assuming that there's going to be a lot of tie-ins, which can be good, but when you look at this with a gameplay-focused lens, there's almost nothing actually there. After a few sessions, you will have maxed out your entire active ability and passive ability skill trees, which means there's nothing else to even grind for in terms of levels, and then there's a whole bunch of potions and currency types to upgrade gear or consumables, but you'll quickly have plenty of those too, and half of the consumables are just flat out worthless, and you can play the entire time on maximum difficulty without even noticing that you don't have them. You really just need stamina and health potions, but probably not even stamina ones. Each area, which is a collection of 3 dungeons within that one area, has a gear affinity, if you will, making it somewhat easier to put together a build, and I did enjoy that part of the game, but like I said, most of the gear sets are kind of useless, and the ones that aren't, primarily the Goblin set, that's the crit one, are drastically overpowered. But going all the way back to the very beginning, even if you have a quality build on your favorite character, unless you play solo, there's no guarantee you will be able to keep using them. This will be temporarily circumvented at launch, aka right now, because the player population will be at its peak, probably, relatively speaking. And the matchmaking will probably slot you in only with a squad of 4 who have the other characters, right? So it seems like it would work. But in every single game ever, there is a natural affinity towards certain characters and classes, which means more people play that than anything else. It could be based on meta or damage or any number of factors. And when you have an immutable composition and a dwindling player count, which this will have very soon, eventually, you will be bottlenecked for a full squad or even a partial squad by the lacking number of players who choose a certain type. Think of finding a tank for dungeons in vanilla World of Warcraft, and that game had a population in the millions. Dungeons & Dragons Dark Alliance was fun for a couple of hours when I found out how to one-shot everything solo, but that's about it. It's got more issues than I can possibly count. It's almost certainly going to run into problems within a week or two post-launch in terms of matchmaking and player count and numbers, etc. And I can say with certainty, with absolute certainty, that the title is not worth $40. It's a $15 game, maybe if that, but even then, I can't say that I'd recommend it fully. The worst part is, I don't think these are issues that can be patched. The AI would most likely have to be totally overhauled. The level design foundationally would have to be completely changed, and so many other things would have to be scrapped and remade in order to cultivate lasting engagement. I just don't see it being possible. I absolutely do appreciate the fact that there are no microtransactions, and the cosmetics are easily and quickly slotted at the merchant just based on whatever gear you find. That's great to see, and it deserves to be commended, absolutely, but that's not enough by itself to compensate for some of the larger gameplay-related issues. Overall, I just can't recommend it, and I feel kind of bad because during the demo I played a few weeks ago, the team was really, really cool and awesome to chat with, but what the game is now, for the price tag it has, I can't get behind that and say that people should spend their money. I don't really give numerical scores anymore, at least not most of the time, but this one would be under a 5. Where it falls in that bracket is subjective and interpreted on a person-to-person basis, but overall, it's got really, really bad issues. That's it. If you want to support, there are links down below, primarily Odyssey. It's a YouTube platform alternative that greatly appreciates creators, also locals, $5 a month to support the channel. There's another gaming YouTuber to check out, buy that sweet merch, social media, etc., but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a nice night.